and welcome back to our Bible reading videos. We are looking at the book of Ecclesiastes today, and we'll be looking at that for the next couple of weeks. The book of Ecclesiastes can seem a little depressing. It is a very heavy book. It deals with wisdom and its place in the world and the life of the believer in God, the person who follows God. And it is part of the wisdom literature, which we've talked about, that wisdom literature which contrasts the life of wisdom and the fear of God with the life of folly and disregarding God. And these books in the wisdom literature include Job, the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, the Song of Solomon, and the book of Ecclesiastes. There is also, though, some more wisdom tradition in the Bible, and we've talked about this before, coming from the book of Deuteronomy. And one of the main things that the wisdom literature discusses is how to deal with the reality that the world is not reflective of God's grace and goodness, and how we do not always experience that unfiltered goodness of God, but we have to deal with this thing called evil in the world. And the truth is that we as followers of God have to deal with evil as well. We're not shielded from it. And so how do we deal with that? The theological discipline is theodicy, which is the study of the defense of God in the presence of evil. How can there be a God who is all-powerful and all-loving, and yet there still be evil in the world? And that is what the wisdom literature explores and gives us some theological insight, some wisdom on how to navigate those realities. And there is a progression in that wisdom literature. What we see that starts in Deuteronomy is that idea that we have mentioned many times before, but that those who follow God will be rewarded with goodness, and those who reject God will be rewarded or cursed with evil and with judgment. But as the Bible goes on, we see that this does not always prove true. We know this from life as well. And so the Bible gives us some progressive understanding of why good people, or people who follow God — Jesus would probably argue that none are good except for God the Father — but why do people who follow God have negative things happen to them? And so we get, of course, the book of Job, which tells us about a man who is very faithful to God but lost everything. But God eventually restores all that he had and even more than he had. Then we get into the book of Proverbs, which really emphasizes Deuteronomy's theodicy, that following God equals goodness and rejecting God equals evil, and the consequences that come with that. The Psalms give us some glimpses into how this works by saying that, do not feel jealous of the evil who get good things in this life, because their reward is coming. And then we get Ecclesiastes, which has its own brand of wisdom literature. Now, eventually, in the New Testament, we will come to understand that even though there is suffering in this life, even though people who follow God experience evil consequences because of the world, we will ultimately be redeemed through Jesus Christ, and we will be rewarded in the kingdom of God to come. So what is Ecclesiastes' brand of wisdom? How does the book deal with the realities of evil? It is much different than the other books, but it is something for us, even though it does not go as far as the New Testament idea of how we are rewarded in the kingdom of God to come. It does give us some insight and actually encouragement on how to live the life of faith in a world that does not encourage the life of faith. So stick with the book all the way through, and maybe by the end of a couple of weeks with it, we'll feel better than we do at the very beginning. Because at the very beginning, the book of Ecclesiastes lays out one of its major premises. And it says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." And that is a little bit of a soul-crushing statement, basically saying that everything that we do is just vain because it won't make a difference in this world. And we read on that there's nothing new under the sun, that everything that we experience has been going on from the beginning of time and will continue to go on until the end of time. And so we are not making any progress, really, as human beings, is the argument here of the book of Ecclesiastes. And there is anything that we do is basically just chasing after the wind or feasting on the wind. Think about both of those images. We could never catch the wind in our hands, nor could we ever be full if we were just feasting on wind. We have to eat something of substance. And so the writer here is basically saying everything that we do is vain. We're not going to make any progress. We are just, all of our efforts at progress are just as if we are feasting on something that won't satisfy us, and that we are just chasing after something that cannot be obtained. Now, who is saying all of these things in Ecclesiastes? We get in various translations at the very beginning of the book either someone who's called the teacher or the preacher. We get the information that they are the son of David, king in Jerusalem. The Hebrew word for teacher or preacher is koheleth, and that doesn't have a great equivalent in the English language. It's sort of a prophetic teaching, a teaching from wisdom. And tradition says that this is Solomon. Solomon is writing this book. Of course, Solomon being the great wise king, the son of David, over the united kingdom of what would become Judea and Samaria, or Judea and Israel. And so this is kind of the height of the monarchy in Israel. After Solomon dies, the kingdom will be torn into two, with a capital in Jerusalem and a capital in Samaria. And the two parts of the Holy Land will war against each other, even though they are Jewish brothers and sisters. However, there is another possibility that this is not Solomon at all, but that this is the king or the heir to the throne of the southern kingdom, that is Judah, what would later be called Judea, that has the capital in Jerusalem, and that king or the heir is in captivity in Babylon. Why is this a possibility? Well, it would give some credence to the fact that this is such a heavy, kind of low-spirited writing. This would give some account to the futility, that feeling of futility that the writer is expressing. But also there's just a very subtle thing that happens in verse 12 of chapter 1, where the writer says, I, the teacher, when king over Israel in Jerusalem, as if he is writing about something that was a past reality, but not a present reality. When I was the king in Jerusalem. Now, granted, though it says when I was the king over Israel in Jerusalem, by that time they, in the days after Solomon and in the Babylonian captivity, they may have not referred to themselves as Israel, but as Judah instead. And so that could give us some argument that it is Solomon. But it's interesting to me, just the mood, the theme of this book, and the fact that the writer says, when I was king, as if it were a past event. This fits very much with the kind of mindset and the mood of the Babylonian captivity. Either way, this is a writing of a very wise king, and this wise king has said that he has undertaken a little experiment to see if his wisdom could bring him any true fulfillment and satisfaction. And that in his wisdom, he pursued all kinds of pleasure in life. He also pursued different sources of wisdom and different expressions of wisdom, and basically comes to this conclusion that none of those things brought him fulfillment. And in fact, he just is in the same exact spot as someone who had refused wisdom their whole life. Wisdom hasn't made an ultimate difference in the fact that he is going to come to the same fate as anyone else. He is going to have to give up everything that he has earned to those who come after him. He's not going to be able to take any of his riches or his gains with him when he goes to death. And so was there really any benefit in choosing God and choosing wisdom over the person that just rejects God and seeks to fulfill all of their pleasures. But in this, really, there's a rejection of that human philosophy of hedonism, which says just go and fulfill all your desires, all your wants, and you'll find satisfaction. I think that maybe we should not focus so much on is he disappointed in wisdom as he is dissatisfied with the ways of the world. This is still showing what is the underpinning truth of all wisdom literature, and that is what the world has to offer is not fulfilling. And so while he has been frustrated, as we all get frustrated in our pursuit of God and godliness in this world, he doesn't say to shun God and godliness. If anything, he's saying to shun those ways of foolishness that only seek pleasure and only seek your desires and your wants. Really, the conclusion that he comes to several places in this week's readings is a place of contentment. Let's read what he says at the end of chapter 2, but this also comes up in other places in our reading this week. He says, "There is nothing better for mortals than to eat and drink and find enjoyment in their toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For the one who pleases him, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and heaping, only to give to one who pleases God. This is also vanity and a chasing after wind." So what is he saying here? Basically, he is echoing what Paul will write to the Philippians many years in the future, that he has learned to be content, that God will supply all of his needs, and he has received all that he has as a gift from God. It may not have led him into any great mountaintop experience, but that really is the whole message of the book of Ecclesiastes, that serving God in and of itself, whether you have any worldly reward or not, is its own reward in the end. To live and serve God, no matter how difficult it is in this world, is the key to fulfillment in the human life. Now, this doesn't mean that the writer of Ecclesiastes is all of a sudden going to give a great expression of joy at his contentment. After all, we see in chapter 4 that he says this. He says, "I thought about the dead who have already died, and they are more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is the one who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun." He's still admitting life is a struggle, life is toil, life is a trudge through the mud. And that's okay, though, because God is with us in that struggle. And God has given everyone an equal experience, because there are places and times for every experience. That brings us to this great passage in chapter 3 that has been often quoted at funerals, also probably would be appropriate to quote at baptisms and at the birth of children. It also was, of course, made into a very famous protest song in the 1960s that was made most popular by the Byrds. But this song of everything being in its time and in its season, everything God has given a place for. And so I just want us to read it, and you can look at it together. This is from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and we read, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." So what is the writer saying here? I believe the writer is saying that no matter what happens to you or whatever season you find yourself in, it is not a reflection of how pleased God is with you or how displeased God is with you. So many of us hold this understanding of circumstance and happenstance as if they are a constant reward or judgment from God. The writer of Ecclesiastes is reminding us that no matter whether you are faithful or unfaithful, you are going to experience birth and death. You are going to experience war and peace in your lifetime. You are going to experience a time to break down and a time to build up. This is very similar to Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount in the end of chapter 5, when he reminds his listeners that God provides the rain and the sun for both the righteous and the unrighteous. It is not a sign of whether God is pleased or displeased with them. What is a great sign is that when we go through difficult times and good times, that we have the witness of the Holy Spirit with us, that He's going to walk with us through anything, He's going to provide for us during anything, and He is ultimately our true reward. What's interesting as we get to the end of our week's readings is that some of what the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying mirrors what we just read in the book of James. There is in chapter 5 especially this idea of being careful with what we say and choosing our words wisely. That makes us think about what James had to say about taming the tongue and about not making oaths. And the writer here talks about, it's better to make a vow and fulfill it than to make a vow and not fulfill it, or even better is that you should not vow in the first place and just do what you're going to do. These, again, are reflections of what James has said to us. And in speaking about what we are speaking about this Sunday with solitude and silence, this reminds us again how important it is to measure our speech, to not just say things to say things or to fill time with words or to fill uncomfortable silences with words, but to use our speech to build up and not to tear down. Richard Foster actually references Ecclesiastes chapter 5, which says, "Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools." He says the sacrifice offered by fools is foolish speech. So listen to God before you speak. He says, the writer of Ecclesiastes says, "Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you upon earth. Therefore let your words be few." I think that's a good guiding principle for us. Listen more than you speak. Let the words that you speak be such that they are powerful and meaningful, and do not use your speech unwisely and rashly, but instead speak life into others like God has spoken life into you. There is a little bright spot, though, in our readings for this week, and a profound statement about the value of relationships, how we can find meaning, and I think find a reflection of God's presence with us in the presence of other people whom we know as friends, as family, as loved ones. And so the writer of Ecclesiastes says this in chapter 4, starting in verse 9, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up the other. But woe to one who is alone and falls and does not have another to help. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though one might prevail against another, two will withstand one. A threefold cord is not quickly broken." Sometimes that threefold cord imagery is used in our marriage ceremonies. And the idea is that in all relationships, the three pieces of that cord are us, the person that we're in relationship with, and then God, and how God strengthens all relationships, and God needs to be the foundation of our relationships. But if you're going to find meaning in this world, it's going to be in the relationships that you have with God and with others. And so we get to chapter 5, and again we have this statement which really sums up the book of Ecclesiastes. "This is what I have seen to be good. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil, with which one toils under the sun, the few days of the life that God gives us. So be content in the life that God gives you. God is present with you, and God will see you through all seasons of the ups and the downs and the flat places, the mundane times of life. God will be there with you, and God will be there for you. And if you find contentment in the goodness of God, in the presence of God, then life will be more than just the vanity that we experience when we try to go it alone. Continue reading in the book of Ecclesiastes. We'll see what the writer has to say in the coming weeks. And I hope you are encouraged to find your strength and to find your identity in the love of God. Have a great week.